The Time of the Ghost, Chapter 6. Julian and Cart were gone a long time. For the first 10 minutes, everyone sat quiet and tense. For the second 10 minutes, everyone fidgeted. Howard built a pile of Scrabble letters, and Imogen made a swift, bold drawing of him doing it. It was quite like him, Sally thought, watching over Imogen's shoulder. And then Imogen threw down her pencil. "Whatever are they doing?" "Perhaps they ran into himself," Ned suggested uneasily. Fenella turned in her chair to give him her most scathing stare. "They're kissing," she said with deep contempt. This caused another silence, an embarrassed one. During it, Sally wondered if Fenella was right. She had a strong feeling that Julian Addyman might kiss people when it was dark, as it was by now. She could not understand why this would make her feel so relieved. She had just decided to set off and find out the truth when Howard said, "This plan of yours, does Sally just disappear indefinitely, or what?" "Until a parent notices," said Imogen. "But," said Howard, "wouldn't it have made more sense to have sent your parents some kind of letter?" "We tried that," said Imogen, "but none of us could think of the right thing to write, so we just decided to just wait until they noticed." "It seems a bit strange to me," said Howard. "We are strange," said Fenella. At this point, Cart came back. She was alone. She crashed through the door into the kitchen like an advancing tank, and her face was radiant with relief. "It's all right," she said. "Sally is at Mangan Farm. They've gone up to bed, Sally and Audrey, but Mrs. Chambers said she can hear them talking, so phew. I was worried for a moment, but it is really all right. That couldn't have been Sally." There was a certain amount of laughter and some exclaiming from the others, but it was short and troubled and rather sheepish. Howard and Jenkins said they'd be going now, while Fenella was seeing them through the green door. Imogen swept the Scrabble letters back into their sponge bag. "Good," she said. "It must have been an evil spirit then. Where's Julian?" "He didn't bother to come back. It's almost time for the bell," Cart said, dismissing Julian without a trace of self-consciousness and even with some impatience. Sally found herself looking at Cart in dismay. Cart was no longer keen on Julian Addyman. Nothing could be plainer. Whatever had happened over the telephone, it had been final. Some of Cart's obvious relief was due to this. What Sally could not understand was why Cart's relief should make her heart sink so. She felt doomed, as if there was something she must go through with now, and that was inexplicable as the fact that Cart so clearly believed that Sally was at Mangan Farm with Audrey Chambers. There must be some mistake, surely. Yet Cart was not capable of lying and looking relieved at once. Sally did not know what to think. A bell began to ring beyond the green door, meaning it was bedtime in school. Howard and Jenkins had only just left in time. "Bedtime," said Cart. "I'm tired out." From sheer habit, Sally went upstairs with the other three. She felt tired and depressed after her efforts at pushing the glass, efforts which had come to nothing, too, except to give Imogen the idea she was an evil spirit. Sally's disembodied mind hurt that Imogen should think that. "I'm Sally," she told herself. "I know I am. When Mother comes in after school bedtime to tuck us up, I shall make her notice me and get her to realise I'm not an evil spirit. But I wish I understood how I can be in two places at once." While she waited for Phyllis, she hung around watching her sisters undressing. None of them troubled to wash, not even Imogen, who took more care over undressing than the other two. Fenella was ready first. She put on a short greyish nylon nightgown, out of which her stomach bulged crudely, and she went wandering round the room surveying the pictures on the walls. "Can mice knock over waste paper baskets?" she asked when she came to the rude rug. "Probably not," said Cart. To Sally's disgust, nobody bothered to pick the basket up, or made the slightest attempt to gather up the fallen papers. Cart stood in the middle of the torn letters with only a pair of pants on, looking down at her large, wobbly body rather critically. "Do you think Phyllis would let me wear a bra?" she asked Imogen. "No, himself would say it was too expensive," said Fenella, and she climbed onto the bureau. Imogen was carefully arraying herself in a wilted pair of pale green pyjamas. Sally knew those pyjamas. They had once belonged to Phyllis. Imogen had rescued them from a dustbin. Like the yellow trouser suit, they were far too big for Imogen. They were decorated with grimy green lace, most of which was torn and hung off Imogen's wrists and ankles in loops. Imogen, however, carefully slid a mirror out from behind one of the beds and looked at herself in it with some complacency. Her tear-swollen face looked happier at what she saw. "You don't need a bra," she said to Cart, "if you intend to be a properly liberated woman." "I don't think I am that liberated," said Cart, still surveying herself. "No, Imogen," said Fenella. "Cart means it'll please boys." Fenella's voice came from above somewhere. Sally looked and found that Fenella had climbed onto one of the 3 wavy beams that ran across in the roof. As she spoke, Fenella set off to walk along the beam, spreading her bony arms wide and swaying like a banking aeroplane. "Stop it!" Sally shrieked, quite horrified. "You'll break your neck!" Fenella, of course, did not hear. She continued to shuffle and sway along the length of the wavy black timber. Neither of her sisters seemed alarmed. Cart said coldly, "Shut up, Fenella," and put her head inside a big, great bag-like nightdress. Imogen lay down on the unmade bed nearest to her. She put her arms behind her head and stared up at Fenella without seeming very interested. Sally had a strong feeling that Fenella had walked along that beam many times before, but she was still terrified. Suppose Fenella fell? She was so frightened that she found she had zoomed up beside Fenella and was flittering round her before she was even aware. Sally's presence seemed to disconcert Fenella. Her thin arms whirled. She leaned out sideways. Next second she was hanging upside down with her knees hooked over the beam. Her face looked exasperated. "You look like a monkey," remarked Imogen. "The evil spirit knocked me off," Fenella said, crossly upside down. "Throw me up a skipping rope. I want to play Tarzan." "Get one for yourself," said Cart. She was climbing into bed, and to Sally's astonishment, it was the one bed that was neatly made, so that meant that one of the 2 remaining unmade beds must be Sally's. In her disgust, Sally descended to the rude rug again. "I don't think much of your plan," she said. "If you don't make my bed, how on earth is Phyllis to know it's not been slept in when she comes?" She need not have spoken. Imogen and Cart were both laughing at Fenella's attempts to climb back up onto the beam again. Fenella was laughing too. In fact, as Sally saw with exasperation, they had all 3 suddenly become very silly. This happened quite often. Usually they got silly when something upsetting had happened. In this case it must have been the séance. Now it was as if a gale of idiocy swept amongst them, whirling Imogen's grief away, forcing high neighing giggles from Fenella's upside-down mouth, and carrying Cart into such gusts of hilarity that not one of her fenced, careful thoughts remained. It was maddening. The room rang with the screams and squeals of silly laughter. Sally hovered up and down on the rude rug, shouting, "What about me? If Phyllis comes up to tuck us up and finds you like this, she's never going to notice your beastly plan." "No, no," Cart shrieked, lying heavily and red-faced on her neat bed. "No, a pantomime." Sally had no idea what she was talking about. "With all the fairies flying upside down," giggled Fenella. "Let's try," howled Imogen. "Bags I try. I've always wanted to learn how it feels." "All right, let's try it," screamed Cart, bouncing from her bed. At the same time, Fenella, screaming "Whoopee!" whirled out from her beam and landed with a jangle on the bed Cart had just left. It was a miracle that she hit the bed and did not collide with Cart on the way, but Sally recalled shakenly that Fenella always did jump to Cart's bed. Sometimes she hit Cart and sometimes not, but she never hurt herself, and she always looked as if she was going to miss the bed entirely, and Sally always protested. "Fenella, you could kill yourself," she was saying when Cart arrived on the rude rug too and shoved her aside. Sally found herself squashed against the paintings on the wall, watching the ballooning Cart heave at the second drawer down in the bureau. "Hey!" Sally complained. "That's my drawer." "It's all right," Cart said over her shoulder to Fenella. "I knew she had at least 2. "That should be long enough," Fenella agreed. Imogen was still laying staring up at the beams. Her face had become suffused with a silly dreaminess. "I think it will be the most exquisitely beautiful experience," she said. Irritably, Sally wondered what was going on. She suspected it was something idiotic and that Phyllis would arrive in the middle of it and be angry, too angry to notice that Sally was missing. She watched anxiously as the loaded drawer was heaved out. "Feathers," said Cart, and began laughing again. "Off the black hen," said Fenella. "She keeps picking them up." "Oh, Monaghan, I suppose," said Cart, and dug beneath the feathers. Her hand came up holding an old sock. She held it in the air, laughing helplessly. After a bit, she managed to speak in weak, squeaky jerks. Look, guess what? Think whose? Her sisters rolled about screaming with mirth. Julian Addimans! Sally watched, perplexed and embarrassed. She could not think why she would want to keep a sock belonging to Julian Addiman, and she was exceedingly hurt that her sisters should find it so funny. She was also a little outraged at the way Cart was going through her private drawer, but not as annoyed as she might have been. After all, if you lived close up against three sisters, this kind of thing was only to be expected. She had done it herself that afternoon, but she hoped that Phyllis would come and catch Cart at it. However, nothing happened to stop Cart, who delved and dug and heaved at the number of things in the drawer, and finally came up triumphantly with 2 neatly rolled skipping ropes. Here we are. I knew she still had them. Oh, good! Imogen jumped up and stood on her bed majestic in her withered loopy pyjamas and took command. Tie them together, tightly. Cart did so. Now, you and Fenella pull on the knot, Imogen ordered. Hard, I don't want to plunge to my death. You would fly through the air with the greatest of ease, said Cart. Oh, I intend to, Imogen assured her gravely, hitching the wide green trousers up with an air of greatness. All my life, she said, I have dreamed of being a pantomime fairy. I've yearned to swoop across the stage in a spangled dress, and now I shall have an inkling of what it will be like. My dreams are about to come true. Now, throw one end over the beam. Would you like us to stick silver paper on your pyjamas first? Fenella asked kindly. No, said Imogen, this is an imaginative experience. Gloomily, Sally watched Cart sling the wooden handle of a skipping rope over the beam, and Imogen reach up and pull it down level with her waist. Now she knew what was going on, and it was as idiotic as she had feared. She hoped Phyllis would not come yet. She watched Cart help Imogen tie the knot of rope around her waist, and Fenella taking a firm grip on the wooden handle of the long end, Cart took a grip on the rope further up. Ready? Get on with it, said Imogen. Fenella heaved. Cart threw back her head, braced her great feet, and heaved too. Slowly, with a lot of creaking, the skipping rope slid over the beam, and Imogen's feet rose from the bed and vanished inside the loopy green legs of her trousers. It seemed that, as Imogen went up, her trousers were going down. Fenella and Cart puffed and staggered. Imogen's sturdy body went creaking upward again, and quite suddenly and surprisingly bent in two. Her red, irritated face was now dangling level with the descending grey lace of her trousers. Ow! She said. You don't look very graceful, Fenella panted. Stand up in the air, puffed Cart. I can't, snapped Imogen. Her legs kicked in an irritated swirl of green nylon. Let me down, the rope's tied too low. Cart and Fenella obediently let go. Imogen descended to her bed in a creaking rush, where she floundered about imprisoned in loopy trouser. Help me, she said. I want it untied and tied around under my arms instead. No, said Sally, stop. As Imogen plunged down, it had looked unpleasant, rather like a hanging. She knew what Phyllis would think if she happened to come into the room at that moment, but of course no one heard. Cart moved the skipping rope up Imogen, taking quantities of flowing green nylon with it until it was under her arms. There was a bright red crease round Imogen's square waist where the rope had been. Are you sure you want to try again, said Cart. That looks painful. Naturally, Imogen said haughtily. One is bound to suffer in the cause of art. She pulled her trousers up almost to her armpits and stood waiting. Pull. Obediently, Fenella leant backwards, pulling on the wooden handle. In front of her, Cart leant backwards too, almost on top of Fenella, and heaved on the rope. Creak, creak, creak. The rope travelled over the beam until Imogen was raised on a tiptoe, and then it stuck. What are you doing? Raved Imogen, swaying this way and that on her toe tips. Pull me up, you great weak things. We're trying, gasped Fenella. Your centre of gravity's different or something, Cart said, breathlessly. Then use your huge weight, commanded Imogen. You're twice as heavy as I am. This was true. Cart nodded and tried to brace herself with one foot against the bed. The bed promptly shot away from under Imogen, sending Cart backwards into Fenella. Since Cart and Fenella both hung onto the rope in order not to fall in a heap, the result was that Imogen rose in a rapid set of creaking jerks until she was hanging about a foot under the beam. There, for some reason, she started to twiddle round and round, Her feet rotated, more and drooping almost in Cart's face. Her hands clutched at the nylon trousers to stop them coming down. Her face, every time it swirled into view, looked less and less happy. "Let her down!" shouted Sally. It looked exactly like a hanging now, but Imogen's sisters hung onto the skipping ropes and stared critically upwards. "You still don't look graceful," Fenella said. "Stretch your arms out." Imogen, whose blue eyes now had a curious, wide, bulging look, spared first one hand, then the other from her trousers. The trousers at once fell down. Imogen held her arms out stiff and straight and swung slowly round and round, rather like an unhappy scarecrow. Cart shook her head. "Smile," she suggested. After a moment, when she seemed to have forgotten what smiling meant, Imogen succeeded in baring her teeth. Her head twiddled like a Halloween lantern. Her face was beginning to look a curious colour. "You still don't look pretty," Fenella said disconcertedly. "Try doing something graceful with your legs." Imogen tried. Probably she intended to stretch one leg backwards like a ballerina, but what happened was that both her legs spread stiffly apart and bent at the knees, causing a great green web of stretched nylon to form between them. She twirled like a grinning wrestler frozen in mid-leap, and the dangling end of her trousers hanging from her feet made it look as if she had an extra pair of knees. Her face was a muddy mauve. Sally was suddenly sure that Imogen was not breathing. She shot into the air to see. For a moment she was twiddling dizzily with Imogen under the beam, with sickening glimpses of unmade beds and childish drawings whirling around her, and beyond the taut creaking rope, the wide interested balloon face of Cart, with Fenella's insect legs and skinny white feet sticking out behind. She could see the skipping rope cutting into Imogen's chest under her arms. "Help!" Sally bawled out. "Mother! They're hanging Imogen! Imogen hasn't noticed!" "She still doesn't look nice," Fenella said. Imogen tried to improve matters by stretching her grin to a sort of leering simper, but Sally was right. She had given up breathing. Sally wondered frantically what she could do. Even Imogen herself did not seem to see she was strangling, and Phyllis was not going to come. Sally suddenly knew that. Phyllis never came to see them these days. She was too tired after a day in school. Sally had been thinking of the far-off days when they were all four little, when Phyllis had managed to come in most nights to tuck them up. So what was she to do? Imogen was still stiff and twirling, and her face was an odder colour than ever. "I know!" Sally found herself whizzing through the room towards a bell push labelled "For Emergency Only." "Because," she said as she whizzed, "if this isn't an emergency, I'd like to know what is. Oh, the idiots!" She flung herself on the chilly little white bottom with even more force than she had used on the wastepaper basket. Downstairs, her worry had somehow communicated itself to Oliver. After a few rumbling, questioning growls, he burst out barking, each bark like a clap of thunder, and at almost the same time, Imogen reached the end of her endurance. With what was probably the last breath in her body, she managed to make her grinning mouth utter a long, grating squeak. "Eeeeee!" "I think she's dying," Fenella said, hushed with shock. "Get her down, quick," said Cart. Sally turned from hurling herself at the bell push to find them hurriedly lowering Imogen. They tried to do it too quickly and they burnt their hands. Fenella let go and fell over backwards. Cart let out a roar. Imogen flopped to the floor and folded there in a green nylon heap, with her face dense mauve, breathing in small, shallow shrieks. "Christ!" said Cart with her fingers on the knot in the skipping ropes. "The rope is practically embedded in her! Scissors, quickly!" Fenella leapt up and thudded on knobbly feet to Sally's drawer. Feathers came out in a black cloud to join the waste paper on the rude rug, and to Sally's relief, the scissors toppled out with them. Fenella scudded back with them and hung anxiously over Cart, while Cart hacked at the rope round Imogen. All the while, from below, Oliver kept up a thunderous howling bark. "Oh, do go and shut him up, Fenella," said Cart. The rope came apart, and Sally saw Imogen's chest enlarge. She made a great noise like "Hoom!" and again she began breathing properly again. Her face turned a more normal colour almost at once. Tenderly and gently, Cart and Fenella heaved her into bed where she lay gasping. "I don't think I shall be a pantomime fairy," she said tearfully. "Their life must be a perfect hell." "I think they wear some kind of harness, you know," said Cart. "All the same," Imogen gasped dolefully, "I think I shall have to stick to my music. I'm not fitted for a strenuous stage career. Downstairs, Oliver's barks turned abruptly to shamed whining. Impatient, angry feet in high heels clattered on the stairs. Imogen, Cart and Fenella exchanged looks of horror. Fenella kicked the skipping ropes and the scissors under Imogen's bed and dived for her own. Cart dithered and finally decided to sit on Imogen's bed in the attitude of a sister exchanging confidences. There was no point in putting the light out. Sally knew that Phyllis would have seen it shining from the stairs. The next second, Phyllis burst into the room. She looked like an avenging angel that has done too much avenging for that day. Tired, so tired, Sally thought. There were deep lines under the angel eyes and even deeper ones beside the angel mouth. The electric light seemed to bleach her pale face and hair to tired white. Sally took one look at that face and found herself up on the beam over Imogen's bed out of harm's way. "What is going on?" Phyllis inquired. It was her terrible, flat, tired voice. "Is this a practical joke? Is your father to have no peace in the evenings?" I'm sorry, Mother," Cart said in a subdued, childish whisper. "Oliver just started barking for no reason at all." "I didn't mean Oliver," said Phyllis. "How many times have you been told that the alarm bell is only to be pressed in a real emergency? And here am I, dragged away from the one peaceful time I get in the whole day, and your father thoroughly startled in his quiet time, thinking there was a fire or one of you was ill, and when I get here I can see at once you've just been larking around again. Which of you is it that pressed that bell?" Nobody answered. Cart turned her head so Phyllis could not see her face, and she gave Fenella a wrinkle of the nose and eyebrows, meaning her. Fenella, whom Phyllis could see, looked blank and stupid in reply. "Me," said Sally from her perch on the beam, "and I had to, Mother." Nobody heard. Phyllis turned the tired majesty of her anger on Fenella. "Was it you?" "Of course not," Fenella said. Phyllis turned to Cart. "You?" "No, it was not," said Cart. She sounded as if she was lying in her anxiety. "Honestly," she added. The beam of Phyllis's tired anger moved on to Imogen. "Imogen!" Imogen had reached the second stage of suffering when you feel it worse. Her face was now white, making her hair look green, a different green from her pyjamas. She had trouble speaking at all. "Not me," she managed to say huskily. And then suddenly the room was full of tension. Fenella, Cart and Imogen were all waiting for the beam of Phyllis's anger to move on to the other, empty, tumbled bed where Sally should have been. They were all avoiding looking at it. Cart's neck was trembling with the strain of not looking. "Very well," said Phyllis. She turned wearily back to the door. "I shall expect one of you to confess to me tomorrow," she said, leaving. She had not come very far into the room. She'd be gone in a second. "Mother!" Sally shouted, and she swooped down to the paper and feathers on the rude rug. Fenella and Cart shot looks at one another, meaning, "You?" "No, you do it." "Mother," said Cart. Phyllis turned back in the doorway, plainly anxious to be gone. She was almost too tired to look at Cart. "What is it?" Well, actually," said Cart, "Imogen isn't very happy at the moment. I expect you've noticed." Evidently the plan meant that nobody should directly mention Sally. Fenella jerked her face at Cart in an approving nod. Phyllis turned her weary beam of attention towards Imogen. "But that isn't an emergency, Charlotte." "Oh, yes, but—" Cart began rather desperately. It was important to keep Phyllis here, since the longer she was in the room, the more likely she was to notice Sally's empty bed. "But it is an emergency that her mark for music was so low this term," Cart said. She was evidently relieved to have thought of this to say. "We don't think it's only because she's always being turned out of the music rooms here. Mother, we think she's genuinely not as good as she used to be. We think she ought to choose another career, don't you?" Phyllis turned to Imogen in mild astonishment. Imogen managed to give a sick and rather self-conscious smile. The smile evidently meant more to Phyllis than the paleness of Imogen's face. Sally saw her muster herself and then smile in return. A weary, warm, comforting smile. Sally relaxed. Mother was really trying now. "Nonsense," said Phyllis, and she had mustered a warm, comforting voice too. "Imogen's artistic temperament means she always builds things up. Every career has its ups and downs. Of course Imogen is going to go on with music. She has an enormous talent. Every time I see her seated at a keyboard—" "About once a year," muttered Fenella. Phyllis shut her eyes in order not to hear this. It was one of Fenella's stupid remarks. "Every time," she repeated, I'm impressed by the serenity and passion of her profile. It reminds me of Myra Hess. I know Imogen is cut out to be a concert pianist. Your father would have been so disappointed if she gave up." At this, Imogen turned her weak smile on Cart. She seemed comforted. Phyllis noticed Cart and seemed to feel that Cart might feel left out. "Just as," she said kindly, "Charlotte has all the brains and none of the looks in the family, so Imogen has both the looks and the musical talent. Charlotte must go to university. She's cut out to be a teacher." "What about me?" said Fenella. Fenella turned her golden gaze on Fenella. "Well," she said. She was rather at a loss. "I shall be an acrobat," Fenella said earnestly. Phyllis ignored this. It was another of Fenella's silly remarks. "It will be something quaint and unusual, that I do know." Cart meanwhile had been considering in a slow, puzzled way. "You know, I don't think I am cut out to be a teacher," she said. "People don't listen to what I say." Phyllis ignored this too. It was one of Cart's silly remarks. She gave them all a tired smile and she turned to leave. Sally jumped, or rather hovered up and down on the rude rug. "What about me?" Such was her anxiety to be noticed that she actually caused 1 or 2 feathers to drift up from the floor. But if anyone noticed them, they must have thought they were blown in the draught from the door as Phyllis held it open. It was Imogen who typically broke the rules of the plan. "What about Sally?" she asked. She could still only speak in a husky gasp. "Sally?" Phyllis paused in the doorway. She did glance at Sally's bed. She seemed surprised, but only mildly surprised, to find it empty. "Well, people who are not brainy are usually very good at art. You know, I think Sally has a great career as an artist." By now she was nearly through the door. Her great black feather whirled halfway to the ceiling as Sally called out despairingly, "But I'm not here!" "Mother," Fenella said abruptly, in the deep commanding voice she used on Mrs. Gill. "Mother, don't you think we are all rather neglected?" Phyllis turned and frowned at Fenella over her shoulder. Fenella twisted her beaky face somehow into an improbably enchanting smile. "We suffer from lack of attention," she said. She took up one of the knots in her hair, and she twiddled it meaningly. "You look after the boys, but you don't look after us," she explained, twiddling. Cart and Imogen were aghast at Fenella's daring, but Phyllis was merely wearily amused. It was another of Fenella's silly remarks. "Oh, Fenella, the boys are all away from home and they need attention. Besides, boys are helpless and girls know very well how to look after themselves. Now be a good girl and go to sleep." She went away downstairs, as she said it, leaving them all speechless. Downstairs they heard her golden voice murmuring to Oliver in the way which always made Oliver try to lick her face. Then they heard the green door shut behind her. "I made sure she was going to notice my knots," Fenella said, mortified. Imogen husked, "At least we didn't get into trouble." "Wait a moment," Cart exclaimed. "Who did push the panic button? It couldn't have been me, because I was hanging on to the rope." "So was I," said Fenella. "So—" "And I was strangling," husked Imogen. "That's just what I mean," shouted Cart. "But the bell rang because Phyllis heard it. So who did push it?" "There's only one person I know would do a stupid thing like that." Sally's sisters stared at one another, frightened, annoyed and astonished. "Sally," they all said together.